Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cypher guide series. Today we're going to do one of my favorite maps with Cypher, and that has to be Split. So Cypher has a lot of really unique one-ways and unexpected tripwires on this map that I'm going to show you in this video. But for those of you guys who haven't seen this series, this video is going to showcase first round buys, defense setups for both B and A, as well as how to attack on both sides. But without further ado, let's get into it. So for first round buys on attack, I always recommend a cage and a tripwire, as well as a frenzy or a ghost. The gun is up to you. But the reason this is super good is so a cage can actually really help your team push up. Like you can block off ramp, you can block off, I don't know, a part of mid. There's a lot of things you can do with that cage to help your team. And then the tripwire can watch flank for you. But on defense, if you want to go more towards the info route and just get info for your team in first round, I actually recommend all of your util and the classic so that you can see if they're pushing mid with your tripwire, maybe even get picks off of your tripwire, stuff like that. But you could also do the other buy of frenzy and ghost or with a tripwire and a cage. Either works in the end, and they are both good decisions in the end. So A site for Cypher is actually a really fun site, as there's a lot of one-ways I'm going to be able to show you that you can really do on A site. But before I do that, I'm going to show you the cam. So you want to get into this corner here, pull out your cam and aim around here, and then jump throw. And when you get it right, you have a cam that's amazing, as it can see into A main and give you early info before they push. And if they happen to not see the cam at all, which there's a chance because it's really high, you can see all of sight, you can see screens, you can see when they push out heaven. You have so much info from this cam, and it's going to help out for this double one-way. So starting out with the one-way for heaven, you want to get into this corner as deep as you can and aim your crosshair. If you see like this little line up here, you want to go a little bit up from there and throw. The trip you want to pair up with this, you just want to place a trip not so close to this wall. You want to get closer here so they can't really back up and hide behind this wall after. The second one way though, you want to get, if you see this like little line here that's going up, you want to run into that with your crosshair. And then if you see this little like triangle in the background, you want to go below it, the line below it like that, and throw your cage. And then you want to place a trip in front of it like this. So the way this setup actually works, you can really play anywhere you want, but you want to be prepared for your one-ways, right? So play wherever you think you want. But when you notice they're pushing up, if you think they're pushing up main first, you can activate the cage or play off of your trip. And you have a really nice one-way for A main if they push. If you notice they're pushing up heaven first, you activate the cage. And you have a really nice one-way for A heaven. But just know that if they're far down in ramps and they're barely pushing up, the one-way does not work on them. So you want to activate it when they're actually like pushed up closer, which is why you mostly want to play off a trip contact for this one-way. This second setup on A site is another one-way. But in my opinion, this one-way is one of the hardest ones to get, and you're not going to be able to do it all the time. But if you are able to do it, you will get a lot of easy kills, and it's a really strong one-way. So starting out with the cam, you want to throw a cam in the middle of this triangle like this, and it gives you a cam that can see into A main and into tower a little bit, and give you some good info from when they're pushing main, which is exactly what you want for this one-way. So for the one-way itself, the same line from before, you want to run into it with your crosshair. And then if you see these little leaves over here, there's one leaf that goes down like this. You want to go a little bit below the middle from it and move to the left a little, something like that. And you'll throw a cage on top like that. You want to pair that up with a trip, the same trip as before. But while they think you're going to do the other one-way, it's actually going to be a completely different one now. Since you have one spare trip, you're gonna want to throw a trip something like this, so that you're able to, this trip is able to watch both vents and when they're going up ramps, which is perfect info and will help your team a lot. But the way the actual like setup part of this works, when you notice they're starting to push up main, you activate your cage. You could also play off a trip contact, and you have a really nice one-way for A main. This third setup I have is an on-site setup and almost always guarantees me at least one kill. So starting out with the cam for this setup, it goes back to the first one I showed, which is this one. And the most important part about it is it watches site itself, which is exactly what you're going to need. If the enemies actually know where your cam is though, place it a little bit further to the right so that the enemies can't break it from main, and it makes it less likely for them to find it. But for the actual tripwires themselves, you want to throw a tripwire like this, as well as another trip against this wall like this. You want to throw a cage on top right here, but while you have one more cage, you actually want to throw a cage in the middle of these two squares at the corner like this, and I'll show you why in a second. So when you notice they're actually pushing up A main, you wait till they get close to your tripwires, activate this cage, and then when you see them hit your trips, you get easy picks on them. You might even get 2 of them while they're all pushing up together. But before your cage falls, this is the most important part. You can run into elbow, activate this cage, and have an easy escape route after getting a pick. This next setup is actually another one-way, and it's actually pretty strong and might work a couple of times against the enemies. But before getting to the one-way, the actual cam you want to do, if you see this crown right here, you want to throw a cam under the crown, something like this. It may not look so good initially, but for the actual one-way here, it's actually pretty good. But while you're up here, you also want to pair a trip, something like this, since it can help you and tell you when they're actually pushing out over here. And since you're going to be playing in this corner, it's actually really good info. And it's actually pretty hard to break for the enemies as well, since they have to look over here. They can't just break it from here, you know. But for the actual important part of the setup, you want to place a trip, something like this. Do not place this one. You want to place the one that's facing this way. And I'll show you why in a second. So for the one-way itself, you actually, there's not really a lineup for this. It's actually really simple. You just throw it in this hole right here. And you want to play in this corner. So if you notice they're pushing up a tower and about to hit your trip, play off of the trip contact and then peek them from here. And it should be an easy pick since they're going to be looking at the trip. But if you notice they're pushing up main first, the reason this trip is better, if it was facing the other way, they might not be pushing out yet into your one-way. But with this tripwire, you'll see them when they're pushing out. You want to either play off a trip contact or when they're getting close, either work. But when you leave the cage, you have a really nice one-way for when they push out of A main. So for this final setup on A site, it's a bit on the weaker side, but it puts you in less danger and you're really easily able to escape at any moment you want to. So starting out with the cam, you want to throw a cam, the same one that I showed initially, which is this one. It gives you a lot of info, will help you on your aim duel, stuff like that. And then for the trips themselves, you want to place a trip like this, as well as a trip right here. And then you want to just throw cages on top of both of them like that. You're going to be playing this in screens like this. And then when you notice they're pushing up and about to hit your trips, you activate both the cages. And you should have easy ways to get a couple of kills. And then just back up if you really need to. So out of the two sites, personally for me, I think B site is more fun to guard. And I'll show you why. Starting out with the camera, you want to throw a cam like this. This will easily be the most strong camera. It can see into garage, and you'll see them before they actually see the cam, which is great. You can see all of site itself. You can see when they're pushing up mail. You can see everything basically. And you know, starting out with just a classic one-way, it's good to know. You want to throw a tripwire either like this or like this. It really depends on what type of util, but let's say they have like a sky dog. You don't really want to throw this one. You might want to throw this one since the dog will go under it, which is pretty good. But for the one-way itself, you want to go against the corner of this wood like this. Move to the right a little bit as well. And then if you see this little line, just aim in the middle of it like that. And you have a cage on top like that. As for the second trip you want to place, you actually, while your cam is watching mid, you also want to have something else watching mid at the moment. So you want to throw a tripwire, something like this, just so it can watch mid for you and give you info on when they're getting control of mid. But where you're going to be playing, you want to play behind this box here. Or if you think they're going to start shooting through there, you can play over here as well. Both work in the end, but I usually personally play here. When you notice they're pushing a B main, you can either play off a trip contact or when they're starting to push up, but you activate the cage. And you have one of the most fun one-ways to do on B site. So the second setup on B site is actually, in my opinion, one of the most underrated setups, and I don't see it enough. So starting out with the cam, you want to throw the same cam as before. It's perfect for this setup as well. It's perfect for almost every setup, but I'll show you some different variations of cams just in case they know the cam's here. So for the first trip, you actually want to place a trip like this. And the good thing about this is it's actually only breakable from this side. Since they can't really see this side, they're going to have to run into the trip to break. And then the second trip, if you see these leaves in the background, you can actually place a trip on this leaf right here, like this. Just know that you can only place this trip when the round starts. But it's still super good since no one's really going to expect this. And when people push out from B main, they run like this because they're watching heaven as well. And then they're going to hit your trip. So you want to throw a cage on top like this, and you're going to be playing behind this box here. If you notice they're pushing around you from your cam, get ready for that. But if you notice they're pushing straight forward into your setup, you activate this cage and kill anyone who hits your trips. And the good news about this is you can actually just back up at any time too. Back up into here, and they won't really know where you went at all. So it's a great and amazing setup to do. If you want to guard A main like really heavily for when they start to push out, this is the setup for you. So for the camera, you want to get into this corner right here, and you want to jump throw until you get a cam like this. So it's really good for when they're about to push out a B main, and you'll see them before they actually see the cam, which is also great. But for the trips themselves, you want to place a trip against the corner of this box or wood right here. And then the second trip you want to place is a trip right here. And then you want to throw a cage right here, as well as a cage right here. So the way this works, you can either play behind this cage or this cage, but one of them is going to be a decoy. And when you notice them pushing up on your cam, you activate both cages.
Cage triggered. Cage triggered.
And then kill anyone who hits your trips. But they won't know where you're shooting from because there's two cages up. The final setup I have on B site starts out with a cam where you go into the corner like this and just jump throw into this corner like this. So this cam can see into tower, and it's pretty unexpected from the enemies. And then it can see when they're pushing out B main, which is exactly what you're going to need for this setup. So for the trips themselves, you want to place a trip against the corner like this, as well as another trip like this. Then you want to throw a cage on here, and then right here. And then you're going to be playing this behind here. And when you notice they're actually pushing up on your site, you activate this cage and this cage and kill anyone who hits your trips. So when pushing A site, there's one trip that you really need to be doing, and there's only one you need when watching flank, and it's this one right here. You place that trip, and they can't really get past it without some kind of updraft, omen, TP, you know, stuff like that. That's all you really need. But there's some really cool cams you can do at the start of the round to give your team instant info on when they're pushing or if they're peeking anything, you know. The first one that you can do, you can place this one before the round starts. You place a cam like that, and it gives you instant info on if they decided to push A main, and even shows you if there's screens. The second cam you can do, when the round starts, you can jump up here, and then place a cam at the top of this, like this. This gives you info on if they're a tower, and even if they're peeking ramps, and if they decide to push out really deep into A main. So it's some great info. After doing one of those cams, you actually start, when you start pushing up, I recommend caging off whatever side your team decides not to go. So I usually recommend just, I always cage ramps right away. If your team pushes that after, that's on them, but it's really good. And then I usually recommend, since there's a lot of places they can peek you, I always just throw a second cage right here, just so I can give myself some space and get the site in an easier manner. But when you actually have site itself, there's two kinds of trips you can do. You can either place a trip right here, or a trip right here. And once you have full control of site, it's time to play post plant. When you're pushing B site, there's actually only one trip you should be doing for your flank watch, and it's this trip right here. This is the only trip they're not really able to get by in any way, except with util. And I'm gonna say this, there is one trip you should never do, and you should not do a trip like this. I'll show you why. It's because they can actually jump over the trip from here, so make sure you're not placing this one and you're placing this one. When you actually start pushing up though, the way you can help your team is by just camming right away and telling them if anyone's peeking. It can see, you can see in the tower as well. It gives you a lot of info on what your team's actually getting into. When you actually start to push up though, I recommend caging here every time, because it allows you to cage off the people heaven and won't allow them to play crossfire if someone's in this corner, and gives your team a much easier way to get control of site. As for the trips you want to place for post plant, you can place a trip something like this. I usually place that, or maybe a trip CT, or even a trip right here. You can place any of these and it'll work great for post plant. And you can begin trying to play time. If you are ever in a scenario where you have to take control of site because they planted, and you have your cam available, there's one really great cam you can do. So if you stand right here and aim your cam around here and jump throw, you'll get a cam like this that has really great info and can give your team info on if anyone's guarding elbow or back, and can help your team basically make space in a much easier manner. Thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope some of you guys found these setups useful and you're going to start using them in your games. I also hope you guys see some kind of better quality difference in the mic, since this is my first time using it, and I would love feedback on anything I should improve on. But for right now, see ya.